Okay, so I'm going to talk about spirits, CLI, magic, and a little bit of out-of-the-box thinking. My name's Jae Wilson. I'm a freelance consultant through my company, Onyx Reporting, and I help customers solve problems. Like this spirits distribution story, I had a client, and they had data that lived in Salesforce that they were trying to surface to their sales team who were traveling around visiting places. And they had a lot of custom data, in particular, like this spirit that I'm selling, is it a priority brand? Now, why is it a priority brand? Am I trying to get rid of it faster? Is it a new hot thing? I don't know. But the point is they had this custom data that was living that they wanted to create in Domo. And we're like, okay, yeah, sure. Just use a web form. And like you have a binary column for the product. Is it priority or not? And that was cool. And they said, but Jay, I've got a lot of transactional data and I want it to update almost in real time. So I make a change in the web form. I want to see it right away in cards. And I was like, that's not a problem. Just use the web form as a dimensional table and then join it to your transactions using dataset views. Nihar was super excited, instantaneous updates. It was great. But then it got bad because every day the customer could have new products coming into Salesforce that needed to get onto this web form so that they could mark is it important or not. And I'm seeing stuff pop up into chat. It's distracting me. Okay, we're good. They were seeing new products show up in Salesforce that needed to get into this web form. And I was like, dang it, we need to build some sort of a recursive data flow where the output of the recursive data flow is still a web form. And I'm still keeping the history of the input that people put in terms of is it priority or not. So let's go build that. Okay, ignore this guy down here. So I have a sample data set. It's gonna give me my product stuff. It's going through classic recursive data flow. In the KBs, you'll notice that they'll do like a join method for deduplicating data, but I do a rank and window and filter, which I've done tutorial videos on my YouTube channel. You can see those later. But the point is that the output of this guy is one row per brand. And right now, this is a data flow. But it's a recursive data flow, which is super exciting because that, of course, means that as I add new rows, new data gets added. All right, we want to turn this guy into outputting a web form. So in order to do that, we are going to use our friend, the Java CLI. And we're going to use our friend. Oh, don't do this to me right now. This is not what I need. Why is this folder empty, guys? Dang it. Do I really have to do this all from scratch? Okay. All right, well, we'll do this all from scratch. So to get to the CLI, you're going to go to the admin section and you're going to do two things. One, we need to go to authentication and I need to create an access token. So I'm going to generate an access token. Never share your access token because functionally it's your username and password, and definitely don't make a video and put it on the internet with your access token, but that's what we're doing. And I strongly recommend that you write it down someplace and save it under your keyboard so that you can find it later, because once I leave this screen, I will never see my access token again. The other thing I need to do is I need to go and download tools. And I need to download the CLI. Guys, I had this whole presentation lined up and ready to go, and now that folder with all my content is empty. I do not understand what that is. But it's nerve-wracking, I'll tell you that. What do you mean I haven't opened a folder? You're on the other page. Of course you are. All right. So I've got my Domo utility file in that folder. To launch it, we'll type in Java jar domo-util.jar. And then now it tells me I'm running the latest version of the Java CLI. I'm in here. Like Ken was saying, if you want to know what commands you can run, just type help. It's not that no documentation exists, but because this product is updating so regularly, typing help and then finding the thing that looks like what you want is the best way forward. The first thing I need to do is I need to connect to my instance of Domo so it knows who I am. I'm going to type help connect. And like I said, it will give you some examples of things that you can do, as well as parameters that you can pass to the connect command. So when I type connect to domo-dojo.com, pass in my access token, it says, congratulations, you're Jae Wilson. Great. Now we want to remember we said we were going to take this data flow and tell it to output a web form. I need the data flow ID. To start with, I'll do list data flows. List data flow. List out every data flow under the sun. Not useful. What I want is I want the information about data flow ID 40. And now it gives me a big old JSON definition of my ETL. I'm going to save it in a file called etl.json. And guys, I'm not super smart. I just did this morning, but if I type list data flow, it tells me what all the flags are. That's how I know these things. Okay, so here's my JSON definition of my magic ETL data flow. And I know it's the right one, right? Because it's got the right name. I can see we're loading a data set from Vault. I'm doing some transformations on it. And the last one we're going to take a look at is we are going to change the output to be a web form. Let's see if this works. To send this back to Domo, I'm going to set data flow properties. But first, I'm going to type help set data flow properties so we can see what it is. And we're going to pass -i for the data flow ID and -d for the file definition. So set data flow properties -i was 40. And the definition file is etl.json. And what did I change? I changed the publish to Vault. Don't publish a data flow, publish a web form. If it works successfully, you shouldn't get an error message. That's the indicator that you did all right. And if I press a quick refresh here, I'm sure there's cheering somewhere in the room. I just can't hear it. Okay, so now I've got my recursive data flow. All right, sorry, I have this set up to output a web form. And theoretically, if I click save and run, it should just, behave like a normal recursive data flow. Very exciting. And I can edit my web form, and it's just a normal web form. And my use case was, my client wanted to have a column called is priority, where every time a new brand shows up, they can indicate with a binary, a 1 or a 0, if this was a priority brand, and I can change it ad hoc. And as new ones show up, they would just get added to the bottom of my list, hopefully. All right, I'm gonna click save and continue. Usually the first time I do this, it breaks, but this time it didn't. Cool. So I'm halfway there. I have my data flow. I should see that it has a binary column called is priority. So when I create my recursive data flow, I still want to keep the data that I entered in previously. So what I need to do in row duplication in my ranking and window function, I'm still going to partition by brand, but this time I'm going to sort by my is priority column descending. So if it's a 1 or a 0, they should float up to the top. If it's a null, because it's a new value, it would be at the bottom. And so it wouldn't be row number version number 1. Right? Just standard. Hey, come on. We're going to do does not equal 1 so that you can see the duplicates that are being deduplicated. So is priority, I'm keeping these rows, and then row version does not equal 1. Did I set up my ranking function incorrectly? Filter on brand set by is priority descending. That should work. Save and run. So now as I preview my data, I should still have those inputs. And then again, as new data comes in, it's going to get appended onto the bottom. And I set it up so that my brand is unique, so I shouldn't have any row duplication. All right. Whether or not the logic of the recursive data flow deduplication makes sense to you or not, that part to me isn't super important. What was the more interesting conversation was this idea that I can use the CLI to list the data flow, i.e. get the details of that JSON, and then I can change the output type to web form. Super cool. So now we're going to try something a little bit different. And it's kind of a use at your own risk kind of thing because it's not technically supported and I could see it breaking, but try it out because it's fun. What we're going to do is we're going to see if we can enable upsert on a data flow. And why would we want to have upsert on a data flow data set? Well, the problem with recursive data flows is the read and the write. As my data set gets larger, I have to read more data into my data flow, and then I have to write a lot of data back to Domo. And as we start getting into the hundreds of millions of rows, that's what takes all of the time, even though maybe only 10 or 20,000 rows changed. So what if we could build a upsert enabled data set where I just transform new data and then append upsert new data onto my historical data set. So what are the rules of upsert in case we don't remember? With upsert, it has to support append. My data set has to be using append. And I have to have a good upsert column, i.e. the rows have to be unique. Okay. Let's see if we can do this on the first try, because you know what they say about doing live demos. Always a great idea. So down here, I've already defined my upsert key as brand. And then I'm just using a row number for my data set to just limit the number of rows. So I'm only going to output 10 rows for now, or 9 rows into this data set. So right now it only has 9 rows. First question, can I get it to just do an append? So first thing we're going to do is we are going to list data flows, get the definition of my data flow. Check. Second question, can I set my data set to output and append instead of replace? I don't know. This worked once and then the other time it didn't work. So I'm altering publish to vault. I'm setting change the version chain type to append. And up at the top, I'm looking for the word replace. Publish. Aha, here. I'm going to set my upsert from version chain type replace to append. And please work. Okay, didn't fail. All right, so currently I have 9 rows. If my ETL did if that update did what it's supposed to do, when I run this data flow, because I'm doing a straight append, I should end up with 18 rows, which is a win on its own because Magic ETL only supports replace. It doesn't support append in the UI. But let's see what happens. No, not good. Append. Append. Let's try this one more time. Did I save it? Okay. So now with the straight append, it tells me it has 18 rows, and I see I've got Virgil's twice, 1000 stories twice. So I know it's appending the data, which again, first step in the victory. So now I want it to upsert. To start with, I'm going to zero out my rows. So to zero out the rows in my data set, I'm going to add a formula and just filter where the data is equal to false. So after I save and run, I should get no rows. Okay, I have 0 rows in my upsert or my append enabled data set. Okay, so now what I want to do is I want to take this data set here and I want to enable upsert. So what can help with this conversation? First thing I'm going to do is I'm going to run get schema. And hopefully I'll spell schema.json correctly. So here I've run get schema and I can see the schema of my data set It's got a column called brand. It's of type string. It's got an upsert key that's set to false. It's got another column called dimension. It has a column called upsert key, again, set to false. Now, Alexis, you'd asked, is it possible to change the schema of your data set? Yes, just change these columns and then set your schema. I could try to set this to true and set that to true. But instead of doing that, I'm going to go back to the Java CLI, and I notice that there's a command called oh gosh, what is my command? Of course you didn't write it down. I think it's called set upsert, but I'm not seeing it. Enable upsert. Somebody save me from myself. What's it called? Enable upsert, set upsert. Does somebody see it? It would be too easy. Define upsert. Thank you. Okay, with define upsert, I pass the name of my data set and then the columns that I want to enable upsert on. So in my case, I'm going to define upsert. My data set ID is that, which I copied earlier. And the columns that I want to have upsert enabled are brand. Okay, it didn't fail. Good start. Next thing we're going to do is we're going to run get schema again, just to see if my schema has changed in Domo. And as I think about it, it may not if I don't have any data set saved to it. Oh wait, lies. Upsert key is set to true. All right. So we took our data set, we set it to append, or sorry, we set the ETL to append. We set our data set to have a upsert key on the brand column. It currently has 0 rows. Let's run this puppy and see what, oh, it's still gonna have 0 rows because I have to change my filters first, sorry. We're gonna change our filters back to where the row number is less than 10. So I should have 9. Is it allowed all these hacks? Well, you heard Darren, he said, if you can do it in the API, it's fair game, right? But it is a use at your own risk situation, because if you alter the schema of your data set, we don't know if Magic is going to remove all of the customizations that I put in on the schema. So that's why I was saying it's use at your own risk. Okay, right now I ran the ETL. We had a filter in place to only have 10 rows or less. So now the output is 9 rows. If I run it again, it's doing an append. And last time it would have set it to 18, but because it's upsert enabled, my output should still only be 9 rows at the end of this. Hey, we just talked about this. Don't make me a liar in front of all of my friends. All right, guys, I think we're just about out of time. And I don't want to shortchange your opportunity to ask questions. So if you have any questions, please keep them coming in while I frantically try to sort out what I did wrong. Let me just look back really quickly. Oh my God, 10 people were telling me to find upsert and I wasn't seeing it. Thank you. The presentation has been shared. Alexis asks, why can't non-KPI cards be copied or backed up via the CLI? I mean, is that a feature request or are you asking someone? Because if it's a feature request, put it in Slack and we'll get it to the right person. All of the pages should be shared with you in Dojo. All of the content that we've created should be shared with you under Domo IDEA Exchange. So if you don't have access to something, just let us know and we'll make sure to share it. But I think people have been on top of that. Anonymous attendee mentioned that there are limitations, like you can't parameterize the command inputs. As a workaround, you have to do shell scripting to prepare the CLI commands in a script file. Yeah, that's how it was designed, right? If you want to do the same step multiple times, you just have to write the CLI command, just like Ken was showing. Right, in this example of doing the backfill, right? This is, you would say, I want to run this command against this data set and do this thing. And then you just do it over and over and over again. So the trick would be to use Domo or Python, sorry, the trick would be to use Python or something like that to generate a text file with this stuff in it. Sorry, not the smoothest demo that I've ever given, but that's what I get. I think what I wanted you guys to walk away with is, as you go into the Java CLI, I appreciate it can be daunting, but if you type help, it will list out all of the things you can do. And even if you don't plan to use the CLI right away, have a look in here at all of the stuff that can be automated. Because even if you personally are not super excited to get into writing code, there's probably, I was going to call him a nerd, but there's probably a developer out there somewhere in your organization who's like, I really would love to be able to do things in an automated way. And I would love to be able to use Python or some other tools so that I don't have to go rooting around in the user interface. And so things like the CLI will help them get started. As we saw, you don't have to memorize any of the commands. You can just type in . You can just type in the command and it will give you examples of what to do. And lastly, as Darren and Ken were saying, if and as you run into problems, continue to submit your questions to support@domo.com. Those questions will ultimately get routed to the right people. Or if you're part of the Slack community, like the Slack guys are really good at jumping in when they see something that they happen to be a subject matter expert or have experience in and give their 10 cents as well. So like, I really strongly recommend getting engaged on the Slack channel.